Are you interested in innovative education and diversity in school models? Do you see a need for something different to bring about a reformation in our current education system? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join us for this special summer series where we will introduce you to the HERO Project. HERO stands for Heartland Education Reformation Organization and is focused on providing support for unique faith-based schools. These creative Christian learning environments, such as homeschool co-ops, microschools, and hybrid schools, are popping up all across Kansas and throughout the Heartland. The HERO Project offers continued support for this movement. I am your host, Dalena Wallace, founder of the WISE Network and president of AIM Educational Collaborative. Welcome to our summer series of WISE and Otherwise, where we will be highlighting the unique role of the church in supporting a reformation in education through the HERO Project. Hello, this is Dalena Wallace. I'm here with Candace Fish, and we are so excited to be launching our new summer series on faith-based innovative schools. I have Candace Fish from Freedom Prep. Candace, tell us a little bit about yourself and your school.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So Freedom Prep is something that I had dreamed of for many years as an alternative to traditional education. It's something I prayed about for about 10 years and just felt along that time that it just wasn't quite time. During that time, I had homeschooled my children. I had had them in a Christian school and taught there. I had taught in public school, and I was just gaining information and learning a lot about the education system. And, when COVID hit, everything changed, and, things changed in education quite rapidly. And all of a sudden we had parents that were having to become homeschool families that had never anticipated that. And so that kind of really gave me a foundation for what I wanted the school to look like. And it was kind of our starting point. And it was during COVID that I really felt like God said, it's time. This is what I've been preparing you for. Now you're going to go with it and do it. And so that's kind of how we got started, was kind of in the midst of families looking for other options and wanting something different. And just from my personal experience, knowing what worked, what didn't work, kind of pulled together. And that's kind of where we started and how we got going.
Yeah, I remember meeting you for the first time. It was at an alternative. It was called an evening of exploring alternative education.
Mm-hmm.
And you were one of the speakers. I was one of the speakers. I met Katie Size there from Greengate and Kaylee and Kamela from Light Academy.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying that you have always planned to start a school, or it's been something that at least has been in the works.
Yes.
And I was just listening and I was like, oh man, she's going to go for it. This is amazing. Like, she's going for it. I love it. I love it. And so to be able to watch your journey, I've just kind of, been staying in touch. We've been friends now. We serve together on the WISE board.
Yeah.
And it's been so amazing to see you launch and to see this just thrive and take off. I wonder, what exactly was it that was that you feel like was calling you to start a school? Do you feel like this was a specific mission that you had, or tell me a little bit more about your motive for that, your motivation?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it goes back to even my own childhood and my own upbringing. I was blessed to have parents that were able to provide me with Christian education from the time I was in third grade through my college years. And that was a blessing, but also the expectations in private schools, and I think in a lot of schools it's still that way, was very high. And I wasn't that kid. I wasn't the kid that won accolades academically. I wasn't the kid that was, the straight A student. I struggled. School was hard for me. And so I felt like, at some point along the way, I quit going to the awards ceremony on the last day of school because I knew I would never hear my name. And I hated that. And it was just not a good experience. And then as my own kids got into school, I was very aware of that, not every kid fits the mold. Not every kid fits the standard of what people think they should be at for each grade level or whatever. And I just felt like, there were so many kids, we had services for special education. And if you know anything about special education in Kansas, we have people move to Kansas because we have so much better special education services here than other states do. So that population was being well served. I felt like the the kids at the top, the cream of the crop, the kids that are going to win all the awards. I felt like we had great things for them, but it's those kids in the middle who often fell through the cracks. And it was because their learning style was different, or, they just didn't learn at the same pace as other kids. And I just had a real heart for that because that was me. And I remember going home from school in tears because I didn't understand something, or I didn't understand the way they taught it. And so I just really had a desire to create something where those kids that had always fallen through the cracks felt like they could fit and felt like they could learn and understand things at the pace that was right for them. And so that was kind of, I guess, my motive behind it was I wanted every kid to feel successful and feel like they could learn in a way that worked better for them without the confines of grade levels and grades and the standards and the things that were more traditional. We could break outside of that and do things differently so that every kid felt like they were learning and growing. And I just feel like that's a really important piece to education that maybe has been somewhat overlooked over the years. And so that was kind of my passion, my heart was reaching those kids that kind of fall through the cracks.
I love how you allowed your personal experience to kind of shape the direction of the school. And I find that is really common as I'm speaking to other school founders. They recognize a problem, or they, from experience, they say, I can improve on this. Like, this is a particular thing that I want to do, a service I want to provide for families or students. And you mentioned growing up and being able to attend Christian schools as a child. I was blessed to have the same experience. I was only able to do that, though, because my dad was a teacher in the school where we attended. And so we had a discounted tuition because of that. And so, again, I just recognize that it was a gift, and it's not something that every family can afford.
Right.
I believe in low cost, high quality Christian education, and to see these options develop more and more. So I'm curious, how exactly do you feel like your faith has impacted or affected your work and your desire to start a school? Was it something you felt called to, as far as you felt like the Lord was asking you to do this?
Oh, absolutely. My story is lengthy and seems to just continue to get longer. But after I felt like God said, this is the time, and we got the ball rolling, there were so many moments along the way that it was just so clear that God showed up and that he had provision for us and that he continued to provide. And, my favorite, I was in a Bible study at a church, not even my own church, but a friend's. And I had told them about what I was going to do, and told them, here's where I'm at, and I'm thinking about doing this. And they were all excited about it. And I left. And once I got to my car, I thought, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You can't do this. And as I was driving home, I stopped and said, okay, Lord, I need a very clear, audible voice from you. I need to hear specifically, and it can't be vague, and it can't be, signs. I need to hear the voice say, you can do this. And the next day I got a phone call, and it was from a number I didn't recognize, but for whatever reason I answered it. And it was a lady that said, I'm a retired homeschooler. I work with a group of homeschool moms. We pray over things. And she said, there's got to be another option for families out there, because not everyone can homeschool, but we know that path of education, works better for a lot of kids. And she was like, well, I've heard about what you're doing, and I'm so excited about it, and I want to be involved with that. And this is what got me. She said, Candace, I've been praying for you for 3 years. I just didn't know your name yet.
Wow.
And I just, this feeling of, oh goodness, okay, that was the audible voice I had asked God for. And within 24 hours, he delivered. And I knew at that point, I called my friend Sarah, who helped me start the school. And she was working in the public school system still. And I called her on her lunch break, and I was like, you are never going to believe this. And she was like, all right, let's go. Let's do it. Because literally, and that's just the way it's been all along the way, is, in the 11th hour, when we think, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? Every single time God shows up. And so it's really grown my faith and developed my faith to just know, I just have a peace. I just know this is what we're called to do. It's not perfect yet. We're only in year 2. We're still working things out, figuring things out. But every single time he continues to provide, and he continues to show up, and he continues to bless us. And so I know that my faith is what has made us as successful as we've been so far, and will continue to do so.
Yes, I agree. I see it. It's so obvious, and I see that God is absolutely up to something big. He is calling his people to start
Mhm.
schools. I see it left and right. And then blessing and providing,
Mhm.
and blessing their efforts. And so I think it's just wonderful to see. And I love to hear each individual story, what that looks like for
Yeah.
you. Let's see. What about Freedom Prep? And then I think I always refer to it as Freedom Prep, but is it Freedom Preparatory Academy?
It's really
Or,
actually just Freedom Preparatory, and we got
okay.
that for a couple reasons. One, I wanted to be clear that our freedom, we are free from the control of the government, free from the constraints of traditional education, but also our freedom is found in Christ, and our
Mhm.
freedom to be the people that He's called us to be. So that's where that came. And preparatory came from the idea that we wanted to prepare kids to be disciples for Christ. And so that's kind of where the name came from a conversation over lunch with a bunch of people that were excited about what we were doing. None of them wound up sticking with us, but Sarah, but it's okay. But that's where we got that name, Freedom Preparatory. And so there actually is no academy or school. It's just Freedom Preparatory. But yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now tell us a little bit, what does it look like at your school, and what's unique about the learning environment that you've created?
So the learning environment we've created is designed to be very student focused. Just because you're 6 years old, it does not mean you're a first grader. And so we've kind of broken free of that grade level expectation. We have classes that are named. We have our youngest kids are Ignite, because we're all about igniting their learning and igniting their minds. And then it goes to Explore, and then Investigate and Engage. And then when they come to the secondary building, it's Inspire, Wonder, Discover, and Launch. Launch is our high school kids, because we're ready to launch them to the world. But there aren't grade levels to that. So Ignite is a mix of maybe 5, 6, maybe a few 7-year-olds in that class. And it's all based on what the student needs. And then the other thing about that is kids move around from class to class. So you may have a kid that's a really great reader, and so they go to Investigate for reading, which is like a third, fourth grade level. But maybe for math, they're really struggling. And so maybe they go over to Ignite, which is more of a K1, 2 kind of, level, and they just move around. At the younger level, that's kind of how that looks. At the high school level, we allow our kids that are self-driven, self-motivated to do some of their classes maybe independently. I have a kid that right now that's just finished his freshman year, but he's here in June because he wanted to get a jump start on his history for next year. So he's here doing history for a month just to get going. So we allow them that.
Nice.
And then we allow them to pull if they play a sport, or they're involved in, they're working out 3 times a day or whatever, or 3 times a week, we'll use those credits for their PE credit, for, fine arts credits, those things that most schools won't do. So we kind of have that homeschool model, but yet we're in a building and we have teachers that are guiding and directing their learning, but doing it in a way that every kid can go from room to room and get what they need.
I love that. Now remind me, did you mention that did you homeschool your own children at
I
any
did
time? Or?
homeschool. I have 5 kids that are all grown now, and at one point in time or another, all of them were homeschooled for some length of time. My oldest daughter was homeschooled most of her educational years up until her junior year of high school. She chose to go to the public school for her last 2 years. But she did a lot of music theater and singing and acting, and we went to New York for 3 months. And so I homeschooled her the most, but all of them at some point in time. And that's kind of where I got that taste for what that could look like, really
Yeah.
channeling your kids' interests and making education work for them. So,
That's so great. I imagine it's such a blessing for the families that are near you, the homeschooling families that can utilize this as an option for them. So I homeschool my kids as well. And sometimes it just gets overwhelming and it gets
mhm.
exhausting. And it's really nice to know that there's support and that there are options for families that may love the idea of homeschooling, but it's just not
Yeah.
feasible for them.
Yeah.
So I just love what you're offering, and I love how the Lord has been directing your steps. And yeah, it's so great. Tell me a little bit about how you integrate your faith in your school. What does it look like to include um, biblical principles or things like that? How does that look?
Yeah. So I would say our school is extremely faith based in all that we do. Every student is in a Bible class every day, every year that they're here. That's a non negotiable for us that we are teaching Bible from kindergarten through 12th grade. We also have weekly chapel services on Wednesdays where we'll have a pastor or someone come from a church or something, and we may do some worship music and then do that. Things like at Easter, we spend that entire Holy Week walking through the final week of Jesus' life on earth and what that would look like, and really intently making sure that children understand their need for a savior. And then our goal, I've said from day one, I think there are a lot of great Christian schools that accept kids that are not believers, and they try to help nourish that and encourage that relationship. But my goal is more to take families that say, you know what, we are already doing the things at home and our children already have a relationship with the Lord. And my goal is to create disciples. And as they leave here, our seniors that just graduated last week, one of their senior Bible final was they had to get up in front of the entire school and tell the school what they believe, why they believe it, and how can they back it up with scripture. And so they weren't graded on, do I agree with their beliefs, but rather, can they back it up? And I feel like that's so important, because as they go out into the world, they can't just say, well, here's what I believe. They've got to be able to tell people why, and they've got to be able to show them examples. And so that's our senior final for Bible is, can you articulate to a group your beliefs and why you believe them, and how can you defend that? And so that's kind of our goal, is really to create, if we have more kids go to the mission field than we do college, I'm okay with that. I think that
Yes.
that is so important in the world we live in today, that we're preparing this next generation to rise up, because if we're not training them, the world will. And, if we're not instilling in them, go and make disciples of all nations, the world is going to give them a totally different message. And so that's kind of my hope and my greatest desire for our kids, is that their faith really comes first
Right.
in what they
Right.
do here.
And you mentioned, it would be amazing if some of your students or more of your students went to be missionaries and be on the
Mhm.
mission field. And I keep thinking about this idea and the theme of missions. And as I'm meeting people like yourself who are actively serving in their community and view their school as a ministry, and they are discipling children and they're training them in the Lord, and they're doing outreach to families and bringing healing. Do you see similarities in that as to being like a missionary out on the mission field, what we would typically say like overseas somewhere, serving in a country and
Yeah.
evangelizing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that we can't send people out if we're not training them up. And, I think we have so many kids that come through a traditional education system, but they have a heart for the Lord and they want to minister, but they haven't been trained in how to do that and what the next steps are and how to go out and do those things. So I feel like it's my mission field to be pouring into our kids here in a way that then allows them to go and do those things, and to be encouraging them to go into ministry. Because, I think to me, it all boils down to the fact that in the end, our faith matters a lot more than whether or not we took chemistry. Our
Right.
faith is far more important than anything we learned in a school classroom, because in the end, that's what's going to matter on Judgment Day, is, do we have a relationship with the Lord? So I'm far more concerned, not that their academics aren't important, but I'm far more concerned with raising up young men and women that are prepared to go out and share the love of Christ with people. And I think,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's my mission field, and then allows them to be ready to go into their own mission field, whatever that may look like.
Yes. And I admire the model that you have, and how you work closely with parents, and
Mm-hmm.
they're very involved in like setting, kind of where their children need to be and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. I feel like obviously the main role for discipleship is with the parents, but not every
Mhm.
parent is able to be at home educating their
Right,
kids 5 days a week.
right.
Um, so I just love that you come alongside parents and the work that they are doing in discipling their children.
Yeah.
And again, part of this series is talking about how churches can partner with Christian educators and how
Mhm.
pastors and our local congregations can come alongside as people like yourself are doing this work, and as families are educating their kids and things like that. I'd love to hear any. Do you have any support? Do you feel supported from your local church or the body of Christ?
Yeah, that that's a tough question. I feel like there's the Christian community wants to support Christian education. I think that for whatever reason, a lot of churches are scared to speak up and speak out against non-faith based education. I think that it's often common. I know in my own church, we have a lot of educators within the church that are public school educators. And so I think there's a fear in offending and going against the flow. But we're living in a time when we're just going to have to be bolder. We're just going to have to stand up and say, this isn't okay anymore. I think in my own church, I have a couple families that attend my school. I haven't really pushed within the church other than I've had a few informational meetings that families could come to and such. I haven't really pushed. Um, but I think I also have a lot of families within our church that live in the outlying communities and the smaller towns, and they all think that their schools are still good enough. They all
Mm.
think that, well, I'm not in the big city school, I'm outside, and so it's okay. And I hate that because there's so much going on they don't know about. Their kids aren't telling them because their kids don't know that it's not okay. Their kids don't understand the message they're being taught, and so they don't say anything. But there's so much happening out there that we need to protect them from. And I think that the church needs to stand up and say more and do more um, to help
Mhm.
steer parents toward, getting their kids those Christian values and getting them just more grounded in faith.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Sure. One of the things I think that can be helpful as we're trying to just raise awareness of this work that you're doing and the mission that you're doing
Mhm.
is kind of telling some stories of the
Yeah.
transformation that this has brought
Yeah.
to families who attend your school and the students that come. I know you have some amazing stories, and I'd love for you to
Mhm.
just share maybe
Yeah.
one of those. Like, how has this impacted students that attend your school?
Yeah, I've had a lot of parents that have reached out and just said that the conversations their kids are having with them at home have shifted. I had a young lady that came to us her senior year this year, and had been in Catholic schools her whole life and had had a good education, but just her understanding of faith was so different. And being here and being in our Bible classes, she was so sweet and would ask the most beautiful questions and always ask them in the most respectful ways. And we were able to share, kind of our stance on things. And her mom came up to me one day and said, she came home and she said, Mom, did you know that people can be religious and not be Christian? And the mom was thrilled with that because she was, yes, they attended a Catholic church, but she also knew the piece of having a personal relationship with Jesus and how valuable that was. And so she was thrilled that she was like, she's been in Catholic schools her whole life. And then as a senior, she finally gets it that you have to have that relationship. And so that was beautiful. Last year, I had a mom that had two little ones, a kindergartner and a first grader. And she messaged me one night on Facebook and she said, I want you to know the most beautiful thing that has happened in my house is she said, my daughter prays the most bold prayers when she's going to bed. She says it's not the little, now I lay me down to sleep, but this little girl had learned, and she had a teacher that was very passionate about prayer. And she said, she prays and she goes before the throne and says, God, be in this, help with this, and was presenting things that a 5 or 6 year old typically wouldn't have the understanding to do, but she had seen it modeled. She had heard it, and she knew that we have power in Christ when we reach out and when we ask. And so, those are just a couple of the things I just think have been moving to me to see happen within our kids. And then we do have several kids that maybe before had not considered any level of ministry, but now they're looking at going into either the mission field or going into worship ministry or wanting to be a pastor or, those kinds of things that maybe they hadn't considered before, but now they're seeing the value in that. And so I think that's incredible, and is really helping to fulfill our mission as well.
Yeah, that's so fantastic.
Yeah.
So I know your high school level, you guys
Mhm.
are meeting in no, I'm sorry, not your high school level, your younger school,
Elementary. Yes. Hmm.
yeah, elementary. They're
Hmm.
meeting in a church, correct?
Yes. Yes, they are.
And can you tell me a little bit about that? Is that I love to see when there's any form of partnership between a church and a Christian school. How did it come about that they opened their doors to allow you to use their facility?
That's another one of those wild, like God moments, because I know, because I had helped in a first year Christian school several years ago. And I know that the lady that had started that had said how it was so hard to get churches to be willing to allow you to use their space. And so I knew that wasn't going to be easy. And after our first year here, we realized we needed a second location. We needed a place where kids could go out and run and play. And we're kind of landlocked in the city where our secondary building is. And so at a board meeting, one of my board members said, "Hey, reach out to Randy Williams. He's the pastor at this church over here. And I kind of can see that they might be interested in that." And I shot him a message on Facebook, and it was actually a couple weeks before he even noticed it because it was an automatic reply. And so he reached out and he said, "I would love to talk to you about this." And so we had a phone call, and it had been on his heart for years to have a Christian school within his church. That was something that he had a desire for. And so it just really worked out, and help we made the connection, and it wasn't an easy process. He had to go to his elders, and I had to come and present to the elders, and he had to go to his congregation, and not everyone in the congregation was supportive of it. And that's just the reality. And so but that partnership has been beautiful, and we have long-term plans to be involved with them for many, many years. So it's really been a beautiful partnership. And I think for them, I know it's also, not only has it helped the school, but their church is growing. And some of that is because we had families within our own school that valued Christian education, but were not attending church on a regular basis. And because their kids are there every day, now they're going, "Hey, Mom, they're doing this at the church," or they're having Bible school, or they're having Wednesday night, or whatever. And these families are starting to attend the church. So it's really a twofold blessing for both of us, that it's kind of going both ways. And it's just been a really beautiful partnership that we've had with them, and continue to have.
I love to hear that. I'm
Yeah.
so happy. It does, it does frustrate me to hear, like when you were saying, the other school founders experience, as far as like saying it was so difficult to find
Mhm.
a church that was willing to work with us and to
Mhm.
allow us to use their space. And I just, that's one of the things I kind of want to get to the bottom of and just explore a
Mhm.
little bit more and do some research, because to me, it feels like that seems like a very obvious use of their space Monday through
Mhm.
Friday, and they have these
Yeah.
amazing
Yeah.
facilities. Many of
Yeah.
them have classrooms, like an entire wing for a children's
Yeah.
department. But if it's not being used,
Right.
how are we as the church, being good stewards of everything that the
Right.
Lord's given us? And if there's a
Right.
need out there, and we can share our space with them. It just seems like that's something maybe we could encourage a little bit more of. And
Oh,
um,
absolutely. I know Light Academy. I don't know if you've gotten to speak with Kaylee
mhm.
yet, but man, I went over there just a couple weeks ago, and I was like, "This is incredible." The setup. She's in a really large church and basically has a floor to herself, and it's just so awesome to see that some churches are stepping up and doing those things.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of fear of, well, what if things get broken? Well, there's going to be more,
Mhm.
this
Sure.
used or that used. Things get worn out. Yeah, they do, but isn't that what the church is for? Shouldn't we be utilizing the
Yeah.
church? Shouldn't we be using the building on more than just Sundays? I feel like the
Right.
mission field goes further than Sunday morning. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay, I would love to know of any specific needs that your school has. What are things? Yeah, I know that's you could probably have a pretty long list of things.
Yes, I
Give
could.
us some examples, and is there a way that you feel like the church could step up and help to meet some of those needs?
Absolutely. I think that there are so many different ways you could go with that. I think that the number one thing you're always going to hear is money. We're trying to operate on a budget that doesn't make any sense except for God. And I have a lot of families here who couldn't afford any other private school or Christian school because the tuition cost is just too high. And so we have been very, very diligent in trying to keep our tuition low, but we still have families that struggle. And if in a city as big as Wichita, the number of churches we have, man, if each church would just sponsor two kids,
Right.
pay their
Mhm.
tuition for two kids, what an impact we could have within our churches and getting kids in these Christian schools. There are lots of great Christian schools. I know I'm not for everybody, and that's okay. There are great Christian schools in this community, and that's obviously the number one way. But then there's always things like, so much of what we do during the day is run by volunteers. I have a mom who has faithfully come every single day this year to monitor lunch and recess so that my teachers don't have to do that. So they can go and have a lunch break. And she comes and hangs out in the cafeteria and takes the kids outside. And that's something that anyone in the church could do.
Right.
At young or old, it doesn't matter. You could come and just watch kids play and make sure they're safe. So that's a huge need. Coming in, we try to do hot lunches a couple days a week. So, some retired ladies that wanted to come and make spaghetti once a month or something would be such a huge blessing. And then I've had one of the greatest things this year. Early in the year, we had some maintenance issues, and I was like, okay, Lord, I don't know. I need you to help figure this out because this is going to cost a lot of money. And I was at church on a Sunday, and a man that I've known, we've been in the church for 20 years, came up to me and he said, I'd like to come talk to you at your school this week. When can I come? And I was like, okay. And so he came in my office and he sat down. I showed him around the building, came in, he sat down, and he said, God told me that I'm supposed to be here doing something, but I don't know what it is. So what is it that I'm supposed to do here? And I was like, oh my gosh, because in the church, he's known as the maintenance guy. When we had a water heater go out at home, Jerry came and put in a new water heater. And, that's what he's gifted in, is just doing maintenance kinds of things. And he has come and literally he has saved us thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars because he has the skills and the knowledge, and he's retired. So he has the time and he's got the tools and the equipment. And I mean, he has done so much for us. So, I know there are those people in churches all over the city. I know there are people that have skills and maybe they're retired in their home, and gosh, could you go give an hour or two a week to do something, maintenance related, or to clean? Right now I clean my buildings. We don't have school on Fridays, and I come and mop floors and scrub toilets. I would be thrilled to hand that over to someone else. So, I think if the church doesn't have the financial means to support from that aspect, I think there are just so many other ways that we could partner and have, people coming in and ministering to our kids and our teachers in other ways that would be just such a blessing for so many of us.
Absolutely. I think it's just a matter of kind of making that mental shift, or just helping to remind everybody that
Mhm.
this is a ministry, and
Sure.
it's an immediate need. It's a pressing need today.
Yeah.
It blesses families. It can be blessing to our congregation and our own
Mhm.
congregants within our church, but it can also serve the community as an outreach
Yeah,
opportunity. So
absolutely.
kind of reminding the church, of this being the hands and feet of
Mhm.
Christ, and what that can look like, and the
Yeah.
opportunities that are present right there. I love seeing just the diversity and how many different school models there are. You mentioned like your school's
Yeah.
not going to be the one fit for every family.
Yeah.
So I think it would just be amazing to see hundreds, if not thousands, of these Christian schools throughout Kansas, throughout the
Yeah,
United States, really. But
absolutely.
I would just love to see Kansas kind of stand out as a beacon, to kind of
Mhm.
show,
Yeah.
just kind of be able to say, look at what is possible. Like you can have so many different schools and churches need to get behind this and see it as a ministry.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Yeah.
so many possibilities there. One of the things you mentioned was the potential of offering scholarships or sponsoring a
Mhm.
child to attend, and that's something that with the Hero Project, that's one of the goals that we have. We have three ways for churches to be activated in this mission field, and one of them would be to host a school on their facility or in their facility.
Mhm.
The second
Mhm.
option would be to
Mhm.
sponsor an existing faith based school like yours, like Freedom Prep,
Mhm. Mhm.
and just kind of surround you and your team and your staff and your students and surround you in prayer and support.
Mhm.
It can be tangible. Meeting physical needs. It can be volunteering. It can be, again, financial assistance, prayer, all of those things. And then the
Yeah.
third option would be to provide scholarships for students to attend. So I
Mhm.
love that you mentioned that. There's an example, Kim Stringer, we both know her at
Yeah.
Creative Kids Faith Academy. She mentioned that they have one student that her own church is sponsoring him to attend. And they do it in a
Oh, that's
similar way
great.
to, like, yeah, World Vision or
Mhm.
Compassion International, like those types of
Mhm. Mhm.
sponsorship programs, rather than sponsoring or in addition to sponsoring a student or a child who lives in Africa or some other country and just needs the basics. Oftentimes, those ministries are providing food, medical care, and education. And I
Yeah.
think if we can just kind of look a little bit closer to home and
Yeah.
see that there's also some needs and we can provide sponsorship for students and scholarships, that would be incredible. So,
Absolutely. Yeah,
um,
that's funny you
thank
say that because I sponsor a compassion child myself, and every
Mhm.
month, $50 goes out of my bank account to sponsor a
Mhm.
child in a foreign country, and it's so
Yeah.
she can go to school. And so
Mhm.
that's funny that
Yeah.
you say that. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but yeah, like why are we not doing that with our own kids right here to make sure they're getting a faith-based education as well?
Exactly.
About that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your
Yeah.
story and about Freedom Prep. And it's been such an honor to get to know you and to watch how the Lord is using you and blessing all of the students that you have. So thank you for
Yeah.
your work in that, Candace.
Absolutely. It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you for listening today. Bye.